So essentially, the Freedmen's Bureau is going to be in a situation where they were trying to negotiate between the two massive sides. You had the freed blacks, the freedmen of the South, and you had the white landowners or the whites of the South, and they were such a minute population that you had single individuals or small pockets of freedmen uh, agents that were trying to act as government agents with little to no tools. And this was incredibly difficult to be able to navigate and still do any sort of advocacy. Meanwhile, efforts to try to move the South towards any sort of meaningful change was incredibly slow. Yes, the South was moving towards rebuilding, but these efforts were so very slow. And what's important to understanding the New South, as it was being referred to, this new labor system, this new way of viewing the South, is that the South was moving slowly. And to understand this, you have to understand that what was happening is you have a restructuring that is essentially a shifting from one system to another system that is virtually the same thing. So we have the sharecropping cycle replacing the slavery cycle. So before you had slavery, where an individual was indebted, enslaved to a landowner, and their housing, their food, their all of their needs are provided by the slave master for labor, and they are not compensated, but essentially their needs are mitigated by the master in return for labor. Well, in the sharecropper cycle, you have a landowner that says to a very poor person, and in this case, it starts out with you've got a white landowner who has nobody to work the land because all of his former slaves are now freed, and you have a whole bunch of newly freed slaves that have no land. And he turns to these newly freed slaves and he's like, hey, you know how to farm, and I need somebody to farm. I'll cut you a deal. I will offer you the ability to farm this land. And don't worry, you don't have to pay me yet. You just have to give me a share of your crops when they come in. Seems fair. But in order to get the seeds for the land, pay for the tools for the land, you're going to need to be able to get those things. Well, don't worry, the landowner also has those things. Again, you're going to need to buy those from me on credit. But you're good for it. You're going to earn all of that when your crop comes in. Just give me a share of what you make when your crop comes in. So the landowner keeps demanding a little bit more and a little bit more of a share of when your crop comes in. Now, this share of the crop, a little bit more of your earnings, a little bit more of your earnings when the crop comes in, doesn't seem so bad, except for this debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it doesn't go away no matter what happens with that year's crop. So if there's a bad harvest, if there's anything that goes on that year in terms of um, challenges or blight or anything like that, and the charges for each of these things are astronomically high. But the landowner, he always cuts the sharecropper a bargain. He says, listen, I know it's a rough year. Don't worry. I get that you had a rough year. I'll let you stay on and roll over that debt. You can pay it out of your next year's crop. So you don't get to leave. You just keep working that land for me. And guess what? You're not leaving. You're still working that land for me. And you're still paying me all of those shares. So now that sharecropper never leaves. Sounds an awful lot like slavery. But instead of being chained to the land, they're indebted through economic means. And so what happens with sharecropping is that now we see that the individuals are economically tied to the land. First, African Americans are tied to the land, but this will then become a larger economic group other than just the freed blacks, but it will encompass poor whites as well. So the sharecropping cycle of poverty is one that becomes a vacuumous cycle that takes in a significant portion of the poverty uh, percentage of the poor South, the economic sharecropping cycle of the South. And you can truly see this swath across the South that becomes just kind of sucked in by this massive amount of poverty. And you can really see the belt of southern farms that just are entrenched in this poverty-stricken cycle. Now, this utilization of labor amongst white society, utilizing black labor for their own purposes will extend to domestic labor. But one of the things that we see in the changing society is that the South will start to become more urbanized, but it's going to be a super slow process. There is going to be an increase in factory construction and production, but it's going to be very slow. Because again, unlike the North, the South is not an industrialized society. It is still going to be an incredibly slow process for the South to become industrialized. There is going to be an increase in railroad construction in the South, and it is going to spread across the West. And that's really where we're going to see um, the South start to have an increase in any sort of explosion in terms of any sort of construction efforts is as it starts to connect in a westwardly framework, because it's the railroad construction towards the west. And as we extend in a westward direction, we see a new pattern of immigration that is going to be interconnected here. And that's the pattern of immigration connected to the influx of Chinese immigrants. Now, we, as the United States, are not just racist towards Black Americans at this time. We are also going to be racist towards Chinese. We are going to see them as a completely alien group in the United States. We will ostracize them at every turn. They will be viewed as completely alien to the US. They will be treated as other in every aspect of society. And we will delve into that a bit more in just a second.